each mind is its own reality, so to speak. And therefore, you cannot tell someone else an objective truth because it's that which you are thinking is only living in the reality which exists inside your head. And therefore, what you think doesn't have any bearing on the reality of someone else. Of course, we know that reality, we have brain scans, we have MRIs, we know that there aren't realities that exist somehow between the synapses of our minds. But that idea has permeated so deeply into what our modernist heresy is that we can no longer speak to one another. We can no longer even have a debate.
Welcome back, everybody. We're the Pinedo Brothers. This is the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. We just want to mention we did launch our new project, Project X, which we're super excited about. It's a dynamic movie watching experience using NFTs. So if you want to get on board with that super awesome project, go ahead and check out the link in the description below. So today we're following up on what we were talking about last week, which was heresies, the great heresies that have affected our faith in the world and continue to affect us today. But before we get started on that, let's ask what is a heresy? BJ, what is a heresy?
Well, I think we did a subpar job last week, so let's try and do better this week. So heresy can be applied, that word can be applied to many different types of things. We used it specifically for the Catholic Church when we said a heresy. So what the Catholic Church would consider a heresy. However, if you look at a very broad stroke definition, which we did, you can see that it can be applied to many things. So what a heresy is it takes an existing whole, some part of an existing whole, and either takes it away or and leaves it empty or replaces it with some other part that is foreign to that whole. So for example, if I were to say in mathematics that 2 + 2 = 5, I would be heretical. I'd be wrong, obviously, but that would be a heresy in established mathematics because I'm taking apart one established thing, which 2 and 2 = 4, and saying it equals 5. I'm a mathematical heretic. And what you can say with the Catholic Church, which, as we're both Catholics, we're Catholic artists working to revitalize the world of Catholic art. So heresy is an important part of our understanding, is that there have been many times over the course of history that there have been a heretic that look like they would prevail over what the whole entire church had been before. So for example, you brought up, I forget the exact term of it, but it was the heresy that Augustine, I think, was very strong. What was the name of that term, that heresy that you had said?
Manichaeism.
Manichaeism, thank you, yes. So Manichaeism would mean that it's an idea that our flesh is evil and our spirit is pure and good. And we're always at a war between what is evil and then what is good. Would that be kind of a very, 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 low resolution picture of the heresy of Manichaeism? But that was a heresy that looked like it would prevail for a while. A lot of the elites in Augustine's time, so St. Augustine would have been walking well before, year 1000. I think it would have been around year 400 or something like that, where he was part of that cultural elite that saw that our flesh, our crude matter, was just evil. And we were destined always to be a slave to our flesh. And you can see that through line that went through in Calvinism, where he saw that our flesh was so irredeemable that only a firm idea of predestination would allow us to ever possibly be saved. And again, Calvinism, that was after the year 1000. Calvinism, I think around the year 1400. You know dates better than I do. It looked like it would prevail over the church. That idea of predestination and no free will for human beings was one that was very, very predominant in its time. And yet the whole of the church, the church teaching that existed prior and has existed since it was founded by the apostles, has managed to continue on. We spoke a lot about Islam, and in our previous week, Islam, as we said, was the whirlwind in the desert. People thought Islam was going to swamp the church, and it looked on multiple occasions that the church would be swamped by Islam, which again we said was a heresy. And yet the church has managed to survive. And yet we're seeing here probably one of the worst attacks that has ever happened in history, this modernist attack. And so I'm excited to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's something really, I guess it is kind of sad, but also I guess it's kind of good in some ways, that the truth is always under attack. It seems that when you're on the side of truth, you're constantly under attack. And it's the good part, I think, is that that makes you never complacent. You can't be mediocre in your faith, and because then you lose it. So it's a constant test, of kind of a forge, forging in the fire of these different heresies and these different challenges to the truth.
Yeah.
Of course, today we face the modernist heresy.
Absolutely. And to echo what you just said, the church, we call our earthly existence a time of trial for a reason, because we are here to be tested, to be refined as if in a fire. That's a very biblical understanding of our time here on earth. And it will always be that way. Should the church overcome this modernist heresy and then again reassert herself as the one true church that pushes forward her salvific message across the world, then there will be another heresy that comes along that looks like it's going to take over and swamp the church. Now, there is a chance, this heresy is so strong, there's always a chance that we know that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church, but there's always a chance that the church goes underground again, and there's just a remnant. I remember Pope Benedict talking about how he expects the church to be a much smaller and less powerful force for good in the world. And that's it. I've heard it described as, will be an ark that is just floating on this tidal wave that's swamping the entire world. And that's a possibility. But those are the two options. One of them is the church overcomes this modernist heresy, and the other is that the church, the modernist heresy takes over the world, and the church is floating on a tidal wave. One of the two.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the important, thing to mention there, is that we're talking a lot about the church and how these heresies affect the church, but they also affect the world, the entire world, in extremely significant ways. Like the modernist heresy is an idea that is not just affecting the Catholic Church. You see the same tenets and beliefs of modernism in society, and in every kind of different facet that you find society in. You see it there, and it affects people. And I think most very recently, I was hearing that there is basically an epidemic of mental health. Like so many people, especially young people, are extremely depressed. And that, I think, in part is really comes from this modernist heresy, because it really, like we were saying, I think last episode, we were saying it really focuses you inward, but not in a good way, where it's like you're only pointed, all your efforts in your life is pointed at finding your own truth, and how kind of finding how the world can revolve around you. And I think that does bring on a great level of depression, which is why you see a lot of these major problems today, because you see it in young people that they're not they're realizing that kind of leaves you empty.
Yeah. I heard the statistic that more people have overdosed this year than have ever overdosed before. um, our generation and the generation immediately after us is crying out with anguish. Like literally, there is so much hurting out there that it's never been this bad before. And that is, like you said, is a side effect of this modernist heresy that we're experiencing. That's so hard to quantify because we're in the midst of it. We're in the middle of it, but it's getting but things are bubbling to the surface.
Mm-hmm. And it's really, really sad. I mean, of course, a big part of it is that we had the coronavirus. I really like saying coronavirus. No one says that anymore. I miss that term. We have that, which happened last year, obviously. And so that's a big part of it. But of course, but it's not like all the past generations didn't have major challenges that they've had to deal with. It's not so much what we face, but how we respond to it. And you can see that we are not capable of responding to it because of these suicides kind of going through the roof and mental health problems being, so prevalent. I mean, you can just listen to any radio station and you'll see the cry for help. I think so many different artists on the radio will talk about it, how they're struggling and they're searching for something that is more meaningful, but they don't know what they're searching for.
And that's a key point, what you just said right now. Art is a reflection of the time that we experience. So it's a reflection of what our interior state is. At least good art is, or talented artists, let's say. Maybe not even, I won't even quantify it as good art. Talented artists are capable of reflecting the interior state of the generation, of the milieu that they come, from which they come. And it's incredibly telling when you start to see the artist of our time, like Edward Munch. This is obviously a while ago, but this modernist heresy started a while ago. And when you start to see that the expressionistic style of the time, this is an example of expressionistic art, shows this interior terror and horror that you see with this picture, then you get to start to get an idea of what's happening. And this has just become stronger. Like, look at what happened here in Houston at Astroworld recently. The artist on the stage, for people who don't know it, there was a concert here in Astroworld, where
formerly Astroworld.
Yeah, where Astroworld used to be, right down the street from where Peter and I grew up. And the people stampeded in this at the behest of the artist on the stage. The people stampeded and started to just walk over each other and kill each other just by their crush of their bodies against each other. And children died. I don't know why children were there, but children died at this thing. Many people died. I don't know how many, but the artist was able to express an interior state so well that he managed to get people to kill themselves. Now that is a perfect example of a talented artist being able to express despair.
Mm-hmm. I think that for me, what this is making me think is that I want to, as an artist, like as a Catholic artist, I want to learn how to respond to this. Like, what is the best way to express? Well, of course, art is part of it. Expressing yourself, but also expressing the truth. How do you express the truth in the best way in this kind of world? But I think maybe that we'll get into that in just a second. Before we really figure that out, we have to really know the deep down and dirty on what is the modernist heresy, because you have to know your enemy in order to respond, right? So Absolutely. I think that, yeah, we this modernist kind of idea, I think, is really a culmination of many years. Like you were looking at, I think it said the screenings from 1893, and I think it probably starts earlier than that. It's absolutely. Just these ideas that have kind of been building up on each other. A few months ago, it was in a discussion. It was like maybe like a 5 week kind of different points of discussion on these different ideas that have contributed to where society is today. And it was very interesting to see how you get the different philosophers and different really thinkers whose ideas weren't super influential at the time, but their writings went on to influence society after them. And then one of those, of course, was Karl Marx, and how his writings have affected society, and not just communist countries or self-proclaimed communist countries, but also in larger ways throughout society. And you see it, I think, a whole ton in dramatic fashion in countries in Europe and Australia and the like. But you also see it here too.
Marx is a key player. He's definitely a key player. I'm not sure if he's the main player, but we're trying to chase. I think what we're answering now, our first question is, where did this come from? And where did this modernist heresy come from? And a way that we can answer that is we look at the fruit of this heresy. We spoke to some, but really what I would, one key fruit that I want to lock down is slavery. We have a propensity now through this heresy for abject and utter slavery. Well, where does that come from? Okay, first, JP, what do you mean by that? How do you have slavery? So communism is an example of abject and utter slavery, where you as the individual are completely servile to the state. You do that which is service of the state and only think of that which is service to the state. You don't exist even as an individual. Now, capitalism, you could answer, is a form of slavery as well. Yes, but it's not complete and utter servitude to some other power where our individual almost ceases to exist in a very diabolical way. And the crazy thing is that people would justify that, well, it's for the greater good. It's for the greater good that you cease to exist. But ultimately, you get down to the brass tacks of it. Communism says your individual no longer matters. You as an individual no longer matters. You only matter as part of a whole. That's slavery. Now, the capitalistic system, you would say there's the slavery of the wage earner, of the hourly wage, where you're just earning enough to get by. And there's a lot to be said about that. Capitalism is not a perfect system, at least as far as I can tell. Maybe I'm missing something, but it's not perfect. And there's many that are at the top of the chain that exert their power and influence so that we at the bottom exist sort of day to day just to get by. There is a form of slavery in that. However, what really exists in capitalism as a form of slavery is when you become when suppose you fall off, like whatever happens where you're earning that daily hourly wage and then you no longer can make it. Well, the government underneath it, the welfare system, is an even more abject form of slavery, closer to communism, where every little bit about what you do and how your day-to-day is spent is under scrutiny by the state in order for you to be able to earn but to be given that which you need to survive. That's as close to slavery as capitalism can get. And just from a very much more broader view, the slavery of as people, was it Marx that said that religion was the opium of the masses, since we're speaking about Marx? Mm-hmm. Well, the real opium of the masses is not religion. It's public entertainment at this point. Aristotle was much more insightful on this when he said that music is that which controls the masses. And what our modern day, that which is our modern day entertainment encompasses that which is music. So that which we consume has a huge slavery type of effect on us, especially when we're just keep on going back, pressing that button to get more cowbell, just got to keep on getting it. So I think that where this came from, Marx is a great example, because you can see the slavery of the modern time, our lack of free will, our lack of actually being able to decide for ourselves. A sort of 1984 slavery is freedom and freedom is slavery
Mm-hmm.
idea is starting to really take root in our day and age, and people are willing to let it happen. Look at what we're doing in America now.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite startling. So I love where you said that Marx is where one of the places where it came from. Can you think of any other players?
I mean, there are definitely others. But before I went on, I just want to comment on one of the things you were saying there. I think that's a big part of the modernist heresy, is the rejection of any type of discipline, basically. That there, since it's so focused on the inward and like, this is my truth, no one can ever, there's no room for disagreement there. It's like everyone is living in however billion people there are in the world. That's how many different realities that there are out there. But that's not true. There's so many billion people, but there's just one reality. So that you kind of have that rejection of like, oh, you can't tell me what to do. You can't, and it's not healthy for me to have any type of discipline or self-denial.
Right. I can't even tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not only can you not tell me what to do, I can't tell me what to do, because that would be denying my true self. That's a recipe for suicide right there, if I ever heard one.
But that's the whole thing there. There's such a absolute rejection of discipline in the name of freedom, and without that any type of self-control, of self-discipline, there is no freedom. There is only slavery to whatever happens to pop into your head at that moment. And so that's where I'm saying, like, in that 1984 idea of like, freedom is slavery and slavery is freedom. So slavery to what you see today, slavery to whatever happens to pop into your head, or to your passions, or these different kind of things, because you've rejected any sense of true freedom, which only can come from a certain level of self-denial and self-discipline, so that you can actually discern what is best for you, and discern what you truly want, and not just what happens to pop into your head.
Yeah, and what's popping into my head right now, just to take a make a little segue, what philosopher was the big proponent of relativism? Because whatever philosopher that was that spouted that, I don't remember. I'm not a philosopher.
We talked about him. I don't remember his name right now.
Yeah, but that idea, that relativistic idea, is a huge point from whence this heresy came from. And the fruit that we're seeing now is what you just said, how each mind is its own reality, so to speak. And therefore you cannot tell someone else an objective truth, because it's that which you are thinking is only living in the reality which exists inside your head. And therefore, what you think doesn't have any bearing on the reality of someone else. Of course, we know that reality, we have brain scans, we have MRIs. We know that there aren't realities that exist somehow between the synapses of our minds. But that idea has permeated so deeply into what our modernist heresy is, that we can no longer speak to one another. We can no longer even have a debate. And that's a fruit of this relativistic idea where, oh, well, what you're saying destroys my reality. Therefore, I'm not going to listen to what you're saying. Well, maybe your reality ought to be destroyed. Maybe your reality is what's making you miserable. Maybe it's not reality at all. This is something that we need to be saying. We need to be talking about. Just because a man wants to be a woman and they construct some sort of fabrication within their mind which says that, oh, I am a woman, that doesn't mean that we need to uphold that reality, especially to the detriment of their own selves, their own body, their own path through this world. The suicide rate for transgender people is even higher than what we mentioned earlier about the youth of our generation. It's not good.
Yeah, but that's super, super wrong to say. Like, people in society will be really, like, I think that if you went onto the street and said what you just said right now, you might get like stoned because those ideas are not acceptable, even if they are rooted in hard data and facts. The fact is that suicide rates for transgender people are extremely high. But you can't say that. You can't point that out. And I think that is part of that denial of reality in pursuit of my own truth. Because you have this idea of, oh, they need to live their truth. And so if that means, doing a whole bunch of chemicals and surgeries to become another gender, then that is, that's them pursuing their own truth. But you can't take a step back. You're not allowed to take a step back and look at that and be like, okay, well, I mean, that might sound good, but what are the results? Like, what are we seeing? And what you see is that it does lead to extremely high rates of suicide. But you're just not allowed to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's another fruit of this is doctors no longer being able to treat that which is the problem. That maybe their trauma exists. Maybe something happened that's hurting a person. Well, we can't address that which is hurting because we need to actually, chop their genitals off. That's what the solution is. But before we get too off on track on this one particular point, what I would like to say is there are other places where this came from, there are other places where this modernist heresy, you can see it exist. And one of them is a huge rush of nihilism. Now, or other people pronounce that differently. My wife always makes fun of how I pronounce things. But in any case, nihilism is how I say it. Live with it, folks.
Deal with it. It's my truth.
Just prior to the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, there was an incredible, this would have been around the late 1800s as well. There was an incredible rash of suicide bombings. I remember reading a fascinating book, while I was taking one of our guests in the podcast classes on the 20th century, about the book was called Angel of Death. And it was about a young woman, gorgeous young woman living in just pre-Bolshevik Russia who blew up a train. You don't think of a gorgeous young woman as the type of person to blow up a train. And yet she did. There was a huge rash of just what is better for the world is that you cease to exist. You cease to live. So I'm going to do you a favor and blow you up. I'm going to blow up this train. I'm going to blow up that train. And eventually I'm going to blow myself up. But that had not really happened, at least not in Christian. Well, Christian is not really a term that's understandable anymore. In Catholic Europe, it hadn't really existed in Christendom or Catholic Europe. And yet this is where something starts. This idea of that we see continued in the Columbine killers or any type of school shooting that happens, this sort of interior pain that gets so terrible that you start to see people picking off other human beings just because it seems to be the best response to the incredible pain that they're living with. So that's another place where this came from.
And I think that is so, to me, that just so not just terrible, but very, very like deeply frightening, because I think it leads you to the source of this heresy. And because to me, whenever you look at like mass killings, like murderers, people who could do bombings or shootings, I think really when it comes down to it, the source of that is the devil. And I think it's so scary to me because you see that this heresy ultimately leads you to the devil. and the natural, I guess, progression of these things all the way is to some kind of mass killing. That's something like that, where it's like that you might have that idea of like, I am useless to the world and nobody cares about me. It'd be better if I'm dead, and it'd be better if I, take a whole bunch of people out with me. Where do you think that idea comes from? There's one being that wants to see the greatest amount of human suffering as possible, and wants to ensure that nobody can go to heaven. And so that idea is almost kind of a possession.
Yeah, that's one of the most frightening things about this heresy, the one that we're living in now, is that it wasn't started by a single person you can point to. Like with Islam, you can point to Muhammad. With Calvinism, you can point to Calvin. With Lutheranism, you can point to Luther. Really, Protestantism in general, you can point to Luther. Where is that central figure that we can point to for this one? I can't find it. I mean, we've said some of the players. Ultimately, any evil you trace back to the enemy of man, the ultimate enemy of man, the evil one. But this one seems, I've never seen, at least in my study of history, anything that more directly points to him, and not some man or some human that is acting on this stage, on this world to confuse. It's quite frightening when you think of it that way.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe for the sake of argument, you could, someone might point out, well, there's also, there's many other ideas which are not this modernist idea that have led to this kind of mass killing. And I mean, I think they could easily point to World War I and II, where it's very much very different, where everyone was devoted to a certain idea and contributed in a certain way. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to construct an argument where the argument is the answer, I hesitate to become Batman in the 1960s TV show where, they're in some terrible straits, and he's like, I have the solution. And he pulls out a canister of something and sprays it out of his bat belt.
Utility belt.
Yeah, his utility belt, and saves the day. But given that I have that hesitation, it does seem obvious to me, and maybe I'm wrong, you tell me if I'm wrong, that the terrible world wars, both I and II, are a direct response to this modernist heresy. I mean, if we're saying it started in the 1800s, there was something already there. It hadn't affected the common man yet very much. But these heresies always start at the top. They always start at the sort of intelligentsia, or the leaders of the day that have the leaders have the ability to construct and use some sort of self-destructive thought or tendency because they have enough resources. If someone that was living out on a farm wanted to think that, oh, well, my life is meaningless, I don't have any ability there's no reason to actually do anything, and my life is just the screen, just like Edward Munch's Scream. Well, they would starve pretty quickly because their crops wouldn't get done, and it would not be good for them very, very fast. However, if you're living in a time of abundance, like we had said earlier, good times make weak men, then you have an ability to construct ideas which are bad for you, because you can live with those ideas that are destructive for a long time. So my answer to this would be those ideas which we're seeing more of the fruits of now existed prior to both world wars, and they brought both of those world wars to fruition. Hitler is an easy one. World War II and Hitler was a direct response to this destructive tendency towards slavery in a large way, where you take that sort of anger and angst and you direct it towards the rest of the world that existed in Germany after World War I. There was a great deal of anger and angst at their situation, and Hitler was able to key into that. And that sort of destruction is an easy way to say, okay, well, this is part of this modernist idea. The concentration camps are an easy fruit of this idea towards slavery and saying that you are less than human. In my reality, I say that I am the perfection of humanity, and you being a Jew or you being a Catholic are less than. Therefore, off to the concentration camp, especially if you're a Catholic priest. And that was a big argument. That was a big part of what Hitler was, and a big part of what World War II was an answer to that. Mm-hmm. And we still had the strength to respond at that time, even though maybe most of us didn't know what we were responding to. World War I is a little trickier. I'm not sure how exactly I can point out. What would you say was the cause of World War I?
Well, I think for sure World War I is kind of the eventual end result of the collapse of Christendom. And that this idea of Christendom, which most people aren't familiar with today, and that's fine, because, how could you be familiar if no one ever talks about it?
Yeah. Shame.
Is the idea of Christendom was that the whole of Europe was united around the faith, around their common Christianity.
So you could be Catholic faith, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes. So you could be a person living in Scotland who is a Christian, and you have something that you have that is what ties you and unites you with someone who lives in southern Italy. It's this vastly different kind of modes of living and types of culture, but what unites them is their faith. And so that's the idea of Christendom, and that was ruptured through many different things, and some of them being like the Protestant Reformation, and then also multiple things. But not to get too deep down a rabbit hole, you see this rupture of Christendom, and each country really kind of starts to really develop that large sense of nationalism, which I don't think nationalism, I don't know. I mean, we could have a conversation on that idea of nationalism, but each country was really got to the point where it's like, I'm looking out for myself at the cost of all others, which is not really an idea that was very present before, because now you're thinking almost as your nation, as your religion. And at least that was the ruling elite's mode of thought thinking. I think from the majority of people in Europe at that time, they were still, I think that their priorities were still kind of right. But I think that the governments of that time were able to manipulate their people into this kind of very heightened, almost fanciful sense of nationalism, so that they were all very proud and happy to march off into battle and into machine guns, which is really, I mean, World War I is always very fascinating because it was the first large scale modern war. And that's why it was so shocking to the world, because you had seen different wars with modern weaponry, but never on this scale. And to see this massive carnage and these mass casualties on a scale that had never, ever been seen before was just completely shocking and completely just unnerving to the entire world.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think what you were saying a little bit earlier really brought up something into my mind about how it's rooted, and this idea is kind of rooted in destruction. And I think that you can kind of see that in a physical way today, through a lot of like modern art and that kind of like deconstructionist architecture.
Right. And we can dive into that idea, that fruit. But I want to answer, you gave me the answer to your question very clearly and succinctly. So how is World War II part of this modernist heresy? I think we need to go back a little bit further than we did. In the Enlightenment time, there was an idea that we've completely accepted in this modern time, that it sprung up during that time where we're separating faith from reason and logic, where we're saying that reason and logic no longer inform faith, and faith does not inform reason and logic. They're separate entities. And in that way, it's really, the first attack was an attack on theology. Before this time, people thought that theology was the ultimate science that we understood everything through the lens of theology. Now we don't even think of theology as a science. We don't even think of it as something that is so vital to our life that it's the most important of the sciences. We don't even have that idea that it is a science. So, but the fruit of that, when you separate faith from reason and logic, it means that, first of all, you're leading to atheism. In the Enlightenment, most people were not atheists. They just wanted to say that, okay, we're going to throw out a lot of that what came before, but we still believe in God, and this is still a part of who we are. And yet, once you separate faith from reason and logic, atheism is a logical progression, or maybe agnosticism. That's something that you're headed. And now that is the rule of the day. People that do not believe in God and deny the existence of, or the ability for man to even understand if that is something that's out there. Both of them are incredibly destructive. However, one step beyond that, so suppose that the good atheist of the day, let's say we move forward from the Enlightenment to the 1800s or the 1900s, the early 1900s, just prior to World War I. They still believed that truth and logic, or that they still believed in truth, which you can get at through reason and logic. However, if you've separated faith from the equation, then you no longer have the ability to understand, to recognize there are things that we cannot understand, and there are many things we cannot understand. And you realize that if you cannot understand something, then your reason and logic is kind of worthless, because, well, what's the use of having it? And that leads to relativity. So the ultimate rejection, the first rejection of and separating of faith from reason and logic, and then leaving faith aside, will ultimately lead you to leave reason and logic aside and embrace that all these different realities. Okay, so that's the progression that through a line. And what you spoke to right now was, when you leave reason and logic behind, when you leave faith behind, you need to accept some other higher power, and that void can be filled by the state. That leads to nationalism, and to a very high degree. I remember that great movie Chariots of Fire. They said first it was king, and then it was God, in that order. That's a great line. And what the response to that was, and look where that led, World War I. It was God, a king, and then God, in that order. So the idea that nationalism sprung from this modernist heresy, which started in the Enlightenment, seems to be a very thorough line here. And now we're getting to a point where nationalism doesn't matter anymore, because we've destroyed any type of reason and logic. So why should you care about your country? Why should you care about your flag? It's all relative at this point. So that's how I respond to your question in a very long and roundabout way.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, it is interesting to see that, like, the obsessions of earlier stages of this heresy are ultimately eaten up by the heresy itself. Because and like you see in World War One, like you were saying, that heightened sense of nationalism then leads to basically people feeding themselves to the machine guns.
Right.
And now, what about, like, I guess 90 years later? No, it's been a full 100 years now. 100 years later, the people are burning their flags and stepping on them. And so, like, everything, it's crazy how it's a cannibalistic kind of heresy, because it ends up eating the ideas that it held in the past.
So where do you see us headed, Pete? Where are we headed? Let's talk about that.
Well, I mean, I think that we're obviously, when you have like statistics that we're seeing today, where there's such a huge mental health crisis and suicides are rising, we're not headed in a good direction at all. And I think what you were saying earlier, about like the concentration camps, that it proclaims a people as you're subhuman. And of course, you can very obviously see that in abortion. And that became a reality in this country, or a legal reality in this country in the 70s. And so I think that abortion is a very obvious fruit of this heresy. And I think that you are going to continue to see these kinds of things rising and building up in society until we, as a people, can have the courage and the strength to reject them. And I think obviously many people are doing that. But I think that it requires a great degree of personal courage each day, because you interact with these ideas and these the fruits of this heresy every day. And it requires us to respond to them with the truth, and that takes courage.
Yeah, I think your instincts are exactly right. When we say where we're headed, abortion is a perfect example of what this heresy wants. Basically, human sacrifice. We would say human sacrifice for the good of ourselves, but really it's not for ourselves, because it's not good for us at all. It's for whatever demon of our age is. It's for the enemy that we kill these children. It's not for ourselves. It's not for our benefit. We're making a human sacrifice to that enemy. And your instincts also to look to art. You've now twice brought up art as showing us where we're headed, I think are exactly right as well. Think about, I think there are three prophets that come to mind, prophets/artists. One of them, J.R.R. Tolkien, another one, George Orwell, and a third one, C.S. Lewis. Now, Tolkien, he wrote in Lord of the Rings about how the men of Numenor, which was Aragorn's people, where they lived, the old men became old and they refused to die, and there was no more young. And the power and wisdom of that people decayed and rotted from the inside, where it was just a race of old men that were made potions for themselves to continue to grasp at their life, and they no longer had children to replace them. That's exactly where I see us headed, is we're becoming like men of Numenor, that we're holding on to our life and we're refusing to give it through sacrificing ourselves for children to bring them into the world. Instead, we're sacrificing our children for ourselves, but it's not for ourselves. It's for the enemy. And then another prophet that I see is Orwell, and he spoke of 1984, the complete and utter despair of the time, where you realize you're a slave and you're not happy about it, and yet you accept the finality of it. you sit in front of the TV and you just kind of turn off. He didn't call it a TV. He called it I think it was a viewing tube or whatever it was. But that's also where we're headed. We know we're not happy, and we know that we're just, a meat puppet that exists in a completely despairing world. And yet we'll sit and we'll listen and hope that Big Brother gives us enough to get by, enough vodka to get through the day. I remember I was listening to an atheist speak of God as Big Brother. And that is completely wrong. Completely wrong when you think of God as a big brother. But let's keep on. Let's keep moving. Let's keep moving. We won't get too caught. I want to say the third prophet that I speak of when I see where we're headed is C.S. Lewis spoke of in That Hideous Strength, the third of his space trilogy, which I love and highly recommend. I don't think enough people have read that. He speaks about how in that age, it's set in the future, men no longer lie with women. They no longer enjoy the sexual union at all. Instead, they lie with robots, and their union is as beautiful and as sterile as the moon. And there are no children that come. And that is the perfection which they seek, is the sterility of the moon. Now, you see that now. Where we're really just a few steps away from no longer wanting to be married, no longer wanting to have actual relationships with the opposite sex. A man no longer will want a relationship with a man and will want a relationship with porn. We'll find all fulfillment in some sort of AI robot that we live with and get satisfaction from. You see that quite a bit already with these social, like the Tinder and those sort of things, those one night stands. I mean, people start off with that when they're I remember listening to a Jordan Peterson podcast. The first interactions that they have are with bots, and bots are designed so when a man enters this, whatever it is, let's say it's Tinder, his first interaction is with, he sees a beautiful face and they have some sort of back and forth, and it's just a bot. It gives them a taste of what they can experience. Soon it will all be bots. Not everyone on there is going to be a bot right now. There's some real women on there, obviously, but people will realize that's not needed, and they'll just construct AI bots for people to have interactions with. Those are the three prophets that I look for. And art really tells us where we're headed in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very, very, very deeply sad. And I think that that is also kind of the key, though, to me at least. That is the thing to hold on to, is that is sad, and that those kinds of ideas and that way of living does lead to dissatisfaction and to this ultimately despair. And I think that is where it's important for those who know and pursue the truth to be unafraid of living in the world in the truth, because I think that people see that. People see someone who takes their faith seriously and strives to live by their faith. They don't even have to be perfectly living by their faith, but someone who is striving for that. People see that and are affected by it. I think there are many stories of people converting to Catholicism because they were affected in a profound way, like in the pit of their despair, by seeing someone of faith, of seeing someone who had that sense of maybe that pursuit of God and of the truth. And they saw that, and they saw something in them, and they were like, I want that. Like, how do I get that? And this is people who are at the very dregs of despair, like on the edge of suicide, and they are able to still, because I think that we all share common humanity, and even if you're at the edge of despair, you can recognize that look, that's something that I want. There's something good in that. And so I think that's where it's important to truly live out your faith in society, and to not hide it under something, or to hide the truth, because people will recognize that, and ultimately it will draw them away from this modernist idea, this modernist despair.
Yeah, absolutely. For people of faith, for people like you and me, this is not a time to despair. This is a time, because whenever we're faced with a battle, this is a time, it means that our task is in front of us. This is a time of excitement. And this is the battle. This is the moment where we draw swords together and we ride out and we meet them. We meet the enemy who thinks that he has won. You know, the enemy very clearly thinks that he has man right where he wants him, and that this is it. He's going to prevail. But the enemy thought that at Calvary too. There's no reason for there's no reason for a man of faith who believes in Calvary and then also believes in the resurrection. We are a resurrection people. For us to be daunted by this great challenge that's ahead of us. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean that the path is going to be. I remember there's the moment in The Extrovert, my movie, where we said, what can we do? What is it? I think it was Bera that said that to Father Peter. And Father Peter said, well, why don't we trust in God for one day? That's just for today. And if it doesn't go well, if trust in God isn't an answer, then maybe we try something different tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But here's the secret, is that it always is the answer. Just trusting in God for today, and getting by for today, and reaching out to your fellow man. This is not a time to circle the wagons. We're not on the ark yet. We're not floating on a tidal wave. There's still good that we can do. There's still art that you and I can create. There's still movies that we can make. And whoever is listening, there's still a task in front of them, that in interacting with your fellow man on a daily basis, in trying to work with your family, maybe they're to allay whatever strife is between you. Mm. There is a huge opportunity, because there is so much bad in this world. But because there's so much bad, then we have so much more opportunity to be heroic. It's an exciting time. Whenever there's great trouble, it's an exciting time.
It's time to stand, I think, for the truth is basically what we're concluding here. And that it takes courage, but you're right, it's exciting. And it's something that I think we're called to do, and that we can do. So that's really, I think, a message of hope during this time.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I have two phrases written above my desk, and one of them is, as long as we fight, we must be victorious. That's from some saint. I think it's Saint Francis de Sales. I could be wrong. And then another quote is, anything is magnificent when compared to nothing. So I put those two together. Whenever we fight, we will be victorious. And maybe your fight looks tiny. Maybe it's not magnificent by any degree, but it's more magnificent than nothing. Whatever you're doing is more magnificent than not doing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think with that, we're probably just about out of time. Yeah, but thank you for joining us, everyone. This has been the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. Again, I'm going to mention it. We have launched our new project, Project X, which is a really exciting new movie watching experience using NFTs. But you can get on board with that and join this exciting new project and be a part of it through the link below that we have in our description of the video. So go ahead and get on that link, and let's tell stories together.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Pinedo Brothers Podcast, an artist podcast for Catholics. We hope you enjoyed it, and if so, please consider subscribing, and commenting below. That really helps. This episode was edited and recorded by me, JP. Makeup was done by no one, if you couldn't tell. The Pinedo Brothers are Catholic filmmaking brothers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. For more information on us, check us out at pinedobrothers.com. Thanks again.